Hello, people! Somebody asked me my opinion on Jiddu Krishnamurti, and that's interesting to me, so I thought I'd do a video about it. Jiddu Krishnamurti was pretty influential on my early study of Zen and, everything else that goes along with it. I read probably 10 at least books either by or about Krishnamurti very early on in my practice. This is the early 80s and it's Kent, Ohio, near Akron. So who's Krishnamurti, in case you don't know? In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was this very large group, they're still around today, but I don't think they're quite as influential, called the Theosophical Society, and they were started by a Russian woman named Madame Blavatsky. And the Theosophical Society took ideas from the ancient East, Buddhism, Hinduism, and all of that. But in those days, there weren't good translations into any European language, so they just kind of made this sort of mishmash of stuff. A few of them traveled to India, and one of their obsessions was to find Maitreya, which is the next Buddha that is supposedly predicted by the Buddha. There's controversy over whether the actual historical Buddha actually predicted Maitreya or if that's a later addition, but anyway, it's in the literature that he predicted there would be this new Buddha called Maitreya. He also predicted that it would happen I forget now, like millions of years into the future when human beings were shrunk to 3 feet tall and some weird other stuff. So Maitreya, even according to the predictions, wouldn't have been around in the early 20th century when these people were looking for him, but, they went looking for him anyway. They found this little kid on a beach, apparently, who they said had a tremendous aura, and somehow they talked his parents into letting them take him in and raise him, I think him and his brother maybe, and raise him to be the world teacher. And they had this whole thing laid out, this whole plan laid out, where this guy, who was Jiddu Krishnamurti, was going to be the world teacher, and they wrote books and attributed them to him and all sorts of stuff. And then they had this big meeting of some sort with I think thousands of people from the Theosophical Society who had come to see the unveiling of the world teacher. He was going to take his place, and this was Jiddu Krishnamurti again, and he goes up on the stage and he basically dissolves this, I think it was called the Order of the Star, and said, you guys don't need me, there's no such, there's no world teachers needed, you go off on your own. Then he spent the rest of his life wandering the earth like Caine from Kung Fu, if you've seen Pulp Fiction, and speaking about life, the universe, and everything. Very philosophical stuff. So by the time I got into him in the early 80s, he was an old man, but there was a lot of books and things written by and about him, so I read them, and I found them to be really good. And these days, I haven't read much Krishnamurti for 15 or 20 years, except I was just up in Ojai a couple of weeks ago or months ago, and I happened to pick these two books up. This one's about Krishnamurti and his interactions with this guy David Bohm, who was one of the people who invented the atomic bomb, a great physicist, a very smart guy. And this one is a book of their talks together. That's all the Krishnamurti I have right now, and I've barely dipped into these books. As you can tell, I buy a lot of books, and it takes me a while to get through them. So I haven't read Krishnamurti for a long time, but in preparation for this video, I went and clicked around YouTube and listened to some of his stuff that's on there, and I thought, this stuff is still pretty good. How he fits in Buddhist terms is kind of interesting, because a lot of his teachings sound like Zen, yet he really, really rejected the idea of having any sort of technique. So when he was asked about Zen, all he seemed to know about Zen was that the teachers in Japan hit their students with sticks, which is true. It doesn't happen that often, but that's maybe another video. But the hitting with sticks thing is part of the tradition. And that disgusted him, and he was like, Zen is nothing but authoritarian nonsense, which, it can be sometimes. And he rejected it, but he didn't really have anything to replace it. So while I find Krishnamurti's stuff interesting and inspirational, and I think he has a lot of things to say that could be very, very useful to people who practice Zen, There's a reason I went with Zen instead of Krishnamurti, and that's because there's a tradition and a teaching and something you can do. There's a practice. There's Zazen. And I think that Zazen is really important, and I think Dogen was a better teacher overall than Krishnamurti. In Buddhist terms, maybe what Krishnamurti was is a Pratyeka Buddha, and I say this as sort of a provisional sort of thing. I'm not saying this is it. But there is this idea within Buddhism that there is this kind of person called a Pratyeka Buddha, which is a self-awakened person. They're usually referenced in Buddhist writings with a sort of disdain mixed with a little bit of admiration or something. Sometimes the tone is hard to tell when you see a reference to Pratyeka Buddhas, because while they are enlightened, they are unable to teach anybody. They can teach people, but they can't help anybody else reach enlightenment. Whether you believe this is true or not is up to you, but that's the legend. And that seems to be the case with Krishnamurti. He had his thing, he had his own awakening, he had his own understanding, which seems to be very profound, but he was unable to kind of transfer it to anybody else, and nobody else really seemed to get him. There was a few people here and there, most notably another Krishnamurti, Ive Krishnamurti. And Ive Krishnamurti is also an interesting figure, and he does seem to have understood Krishnamurti. But there's a few other people running around that I've encountered here and there, not personally, but just in books and online and things, claiming to be the Dharma heir, as it were, to Krishnamurti, and when I see what they write and say, they seem like they don't have a clue. And he had thousands of followers, and he kind of left behind a legacy. That's why I found that book in Ojai, California. He established a school and some stuff. So he has a legacy, and he has a lot of books, and people gather together and listen to his talks and things, and I guess they talk about them and stuff. I'm not sure. I've never been to the meetings. But there isn't really anything like a solid tradition following him, and I guess he never wanted that, so that's fine. But that's kind of how I feel about him. So I would say, as far as Krishnamurti is concerned, I do recommend anybody who's really serious about Zen philosophy to check him out. He does say some real interesting things, and they do have a lot of resonance with Zen teachings. On the other hand, he's kind of a cantankerous fellow, and a little stern, and despite his anti-authoritarianism, it does seem he seems like a bit of an authoritarian himself, insisting that his way is right. Then again, that has a lot in common with my own teacher, Gudo Nishijima, who as I've mentioned here, he annoyed me with his insistence that he was right. So there you go. Some people just have to do that. That's their way. Anyway, those are my feelings about Krishnamurti. I hope that was somewhat interesting. If you want to donate to me being able to say more things about more people, well, I probably won't do that. But anyway, if you want to donate to me, Patreon and PayPal links are below. That really helps me out. That's how I make my living. I appreciate your support. See you next time. Bye.